Greetings and salutations, everyone. This is your weekly Institute for the Study of War brief with your host CG on Warcast. We are now uploading to Spotify. After someone did suggest it, and I looked into it, it seems like something I will probably doing from here on out for the brief. Due to content sensitivity and stuff, the combat footage we do on Monday will still only be uploaded to Rumble and Odyssey, because those are the only two safe platforms that we could put that on. I'm going to start looking into X a little bit more, but I don't think we could do the combat footage on there either. So there's a few things I need to figure that out too. I'm not sure if I have to pay for that either. Anyway, yes. So we had a good show last night. I misunderstood the the participation of some people in the audience there. Um, I thought we dragged as many people as we could over to the Warcast channel, and it seems like a lot of people are still over on Radio Ruin watching it there instead of migrating over towards the new channel on Odyssey. So if you guys are listening on Odyssey, please migrate over towards the Warcast channel. Proper, little under 80 viewers or 80 followers right now. That is where I focus my primary attention on right now as a media outsource right now. And from there, we'll try to expand our footprint a little bit more again with Odyssey. Oh, sorry. The Spotify account being the newest one I'm trying to get stuff up with. But as you all know, this is not a super serious uh, podcast that is going to be a money making thing. That was never the intention with this project. Um, we believe in the message. We believe in the efforts we put in. At the same time, it's we want more impact to kind of get that gratification back also for ourselves. It's a productive cycle that helps us keep our enthusiasm up for the show. Anyway, getting on over to, let me think here. Still working on an interview for next week, I think. We'll see about that. I'm a little less optimistic about it right now just due to scheduling conflictions again. So we'll probably have a normal show next week. Um, Nothing else really going on in the background for the production side of things for the show. And yeah, let's just get right into it. Let me start off with the map here like we did last night. So this is okay. So we'll start off with Russia proper here. This is showing an overview of what we were talking about on the combat footage a little bit last night. It doesn't show all the air bases that were hit in Russia, but it does show from the Russian HQ, well, pictures from the how to put it, the warehouse that the Ukrainians were using in Chelyabinsk, and this was the inside of the warehouse here. It looks like, and then the false tops that the trucks were installed with for the drone attack here. But I wanted to show you where the FSB building was. So this is where the Ukrainian operation centered out of, and it's a great spot because it's right across the border from Kazakhstan, which is a very big country and a great spot to kind of just move everything in and just jump across the border there. They could have done it in Novosibirsk, uh, also Orenburg or Ufa, any of these other places here, but they chose a spot here. Um, and the locations, I mean, they struck all the way over in Lake Baikal here. You can see here some of the footage they did post, obviously. But again, another spot that the Ukrainians tried to hit was over in this area that did get interrupted by local Russians there. And they ranged out towards Moscow, which is right here, and hit two bases northeast and southwest of there, and then all the way up near Murmansk. Anyway, so that's another video right there that we did have visual confirmation on there. But there was also supposedly a fire from their naval base here in Kola Bay, which is where their North Seas Fleet is stationed, though. So we'll see if we get any confirmation on that, though. But I imagine the Russians want to hide if one of the subs did get destroyed or damaged. Okay, so let's get down to Ukraine proper here. Start over in Sumi. Really nothing new out of Tequino. This is for anyone that's new on Spotify. Actually, I should probably make a better show introduction. So this show, for anyone that's listening to this for the first time on Spotify, this show does two shows a week. We are part of the Radio Room network that really is based out of Telegram and Odyssey. We're again trying to put a more permanent footprint on Rumble. Rumble's on and off with how we can live stream. But the show focuses on primarily on the Ukrainian conflict. We are a pro-European and nationalist um, identity. How to put it? Uh, Podcast group of guys, whatever you want to call it, that focuses on this war because it affects Europe or European people, and as an ethnicity that has been historically subjected under the Russian imperial boot. Uh, their liberation and revolution in Maidan and the ongoing war is part of a greater struggle, we believe, that helps our people free themselves. So there's a lot more nuance in that, and we have episodes going back 3 years on Odyssey. We've interviewed many volunteers. People in our chat are volunteering over there right now. We have connections with veterans of the war, the early part of it, especially a Swedish one, who wrote Foreigner Group. We've read our books. I do research every week on the war. I usually, for the studies, read RUSI, which is the Royal United. I forgot the rest of that acronym, but it's a British source that does a lot of politics, economics, history, warfighting studies, and stuff like that. Rand Institute sometimes. Some other spots I read too, though. But a lot of these publications are circulated amongst people publicly, so it's fairly easy to access these things. But people don't put the time in to study these publications. That's what I do sometimes in my off time because I'm a nerd like that, I guess. And I try to put it in a format that is as easy to make it accessible for the common person to understand. Um, Sometimes I'm good at that, sometimes I'm not. The art of brevity is something I'm still working on, so that is an ongoing future strength I'm working on building. So anyway, so that is a small synopsis of the show. If you have any questions, please comment, or please comment over on the Telegram channel or chat we have. As you can see, we have the chat over at t.me/radio and chat, and the channel I broadcast information and thoughts over on is on Telegram. That's our primary social media. Is over at t.me/the Warcast, and donations are over at buymeacoffee/wcast. So anyway, let's get back to the map. Nothing new out of Taquino. Let me just move the map forward here a little bit more. The Russians have attempted to flatten or extend the front a little bit more out of Suja. Right here, we all know about that from the summer to fall here. A lot more, how to put it, a lot more reports coming out just how slow this has been. This is kind of another Vovchansk stall here a little bit. I mean, the Russians have tried to push out here with some of their naval infantry troops and VDV airborne, and haven't made too much progress. The Russians were blowing their own horns over the last couple of weeks about how much progress they're making, but it's another effort where they've tried to extend some of their past efforts. Where they thought they were victorious in Suja and tried to press into Sumy. Some Ukrainians I do sometimes watch were afraid of Sumy being under threat, but they were saying Sumy is only 300 kilometers away from Kiev. I'm like, okay. Anyway, I mean it's a lot further away than Donetsk, obviously. Sorry, Donetsk is not further away, but they were worried about how close Sumy is to Kiev, relatively speaking. I thought that was a little bit odd for some of these Ukrainian content creators to say that. I'm just like, it's not that close, seeing as how slow the war's been going. So anyway, so this is a new development here as we see out of Gormal this enveloping, I guess, of the area around it. The Ukrainians have been trying to get into Goyevo, and I think, yeah, there's also this village right here in Olishna. While the Russians are pushing over the west here, the Ukrainians are pushing into the east here. Um, it's interesting. Just again, these are a lot of border towns, so it's kind of more of a skirmish level fighting going on. But that's all that's going on there too. Ukraine's no longer in Demidovka, but they do hold a toehold in the forest area here west of Demidovka. But that's what's going on there. There's reports that the Russians still have about 50,000 troops accumulated post the siege operation in this area right here. Moving over towards Vovchansk, nothing new out of Hilboke or Lukyansky, which is south of Belgorod here for people that need a geographic point of reference. Um, Interesting. So this shows. Oh, this is just Ukrainian equipment being hit. Russian drone attacks. Okay. So it looks like there might have been a rotation here, and the Russians were showing off some of their their downrange capabilities here. So the Ukrainians were trying to hold this village here and keep them in place, it seems like. But anyway, nothing new out of Vovchansk. Russians were dropping glide bombs to the southeast of that area, south of Taik. Not much really, again, going on here. The For people that are just catching us here over on Spotify, um, I do go over these maps and try to track the advances by the Russians or Ukrainians in the map as best possible. But again, the more you watch with us, you'll learn more about the pros and cons of open source intelligence. It's not the best, it's not the worst, but it's what we got to comment with. Supposedly the Russians were trying to establish a pontoon bridge along the Vovcha River here. That has failed, per Ukrainian sources, though. So it looks like the Ukrainians do still hold the aggregate plant right here, according to most reports I've seen. But the Russians, depending on the day or resource you read, they've reached these couple city blocks um, to reach the Vovcha River to try to push south into the southern half of the city. Again, we've shown a good number of videos coming from Vovchansk. The city's just off the map. It's been completely decimated. You kind of tell what it looked like before. Decent sized town, pretty cozy for the most part. A lot of forest, a good river running through the middle of it, and town was close to 10,000 people. I want to say 8,000, maybe more, but yeah, a decent sized town. But it's just off the map now because it's been destroyed by the Russians. Okay. So the only other really big thing that's happened near the Kupiansk sector is the Russians pushed into Topole here. There was footage showing them in the center of the small village. Um, I don't know. Not really a big deal. It seems like, 'cause you can barely kind of see if there's any buildings here. These buildings are pressed right against the border here too. And then you see this. How to put it? The road stops right here, but this is the international border here too. So, um, yeah, you can see it's in Russian right there too. Anyway, just kind of interesting how bifurcated these villages are sometimes, just because there's a line on a map. But anyway, nothing new out of Kamlanka. Nothing out of Dolrichna either. It's been pretty stagnant there for the most part. Nothing out of Zapadne, and the Ukrainians still hold onto the southern half of Sinkivka in that area. Um, the Ukrainians did take back Sorry, I do have a hard time sometimes enunciating Slavic place names. So Zarozove, and the Russians are trying to get pushed south, try to get down to Bohoslavka. This has been an interesting back and forth, though. This is not a big meat grinder, but it's been a back and forth slug match between the Ukrainians holding this and the Russians kind of just stepping to their side and trying to get down the road so where they could choke off where the Ukrainians get to that area. We've seen them also take over Kurlikivka at times, but anyway, it's an interesting back and forth there. Third assault was in this area. So when they took over Nadia, we haven't seen a whole lot of forward movement for them to push towards Svatove, which would be the ultimate mission goal for the Ukrainians there. As you can see, this is a major node in northern Luhansk, probably the most important outside of Pidorivka. That's the real name. This being the main spoke in the wheel around northern Luhansk. But if the Ukrainians did manage to push towards Svatove, which is a fairly large-sized town, this would essentially knock out the node for a lot of the Russian frontier. This was one of the other goals during the Kharkiv counteroffensive operation 2022. But again, they came up short. But I was hoping for a successive series of operations from Third Assault here because they did a fairly good job taking Nadia, pushing onto Ryhoroka, and then push into the outskirts of Svatove eventually as soon as they took over the rest of like maybe Papivka and Dachna here. But it seems like they just dug into Nadia. Pushing on into the one worrisome sector in the Luhansk area, the Russians are still pushing from the Zarabets Reservoir here. Um, this is interesting just because, again, we've talked about on the normal show prior to being on Spotify. The Russians crossed the reservoir here, moved along this spine here, the series of villages, got to Nove, Lipove, and now they're trying to do another spike attack out towards Karpivka, um, which is really weird because they're trying. Ultimately, they want to get to Lim or Izium right here. This was a major victory for the Ukrainians, again, back a few years ago during the counteroffensive operation, because that's another, ground-like communication, that's a node for a lot of area here. So when that fell to the Ukrainians, that pushed them all the way back forward into Russian-held territory. But again, it's creating a cauldron where Ukrainian drone operators can have the pickings of what they want on the Russians, because there's only one real road running all the way out there, and that's going to create problems for Russian logistics, obviously. I mean, there's nothing here, it's just field. So, this is the one road that the Ukrainians can target for all this massing out here for the Russians. So, between Novus Dove, again, I'm really bad with place names sometimes, it gives them about, 11 kilometers to play with. Roughly speaking, right? That the Russians have to move across. It's a huge amount of territory for drones to work with. Anyway, um, and I would imagine that's going to peter out eventually as soon as a drone operating unit that can target that fairly well can target the Russians there and their logistics. Nothing new out of Belhorivka and the Seversk salient. Holding pretty well. The Again, another Russian commander was fired in this area for lackluster results on the Russian side there. Um, we talked about Chasiv Yar. Looks like the Russians have pushed hard in the center here, taking the last few residential buildings, it looks like, and the high rises along the backstop here towards the reservoir. Um, Again, it still shows a lot of contested buildings, and again, buildings do change hands. But the fighting will probably in the next month or two move towards Shevchenko and the other areas southwest of Chasiv Yar. Um, but yeah, this is all moving towards an eventual fight towards Konstantinivka, which is one of the two major uh, objectives for the Russians, though. It's either going to be Pokrovsk or Konstantinivka. The Russians don't have the capability of assaulting both. Um, Strategically speaking, it would be better for the Russians to target Slovyansk all the way down to Konstantinivka because this is the fortress belt city, or sorry, fortress city belt, and that is the backbone of the Ukrainian defense in all of the Donbass. But the Russians don't have the capability of taking Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhivka, and Konstantinivka. These are large cities, and they just don't have the capability or manning to really do it. Um, they could probably look to Pokrovsk maybe, but they are trying their hardest to move around any urban fighting anymore after Bakhmut and Mariupol and Lysychansk and all these other areas. They lost a lot of men in urban fighting. And as you can see in Toretsk and Chasiv Yar, the Ukrainians excel in urban fighting. The Russians have been held up in Toretsk for months upon months, and I think close to a year in Chasiv Yar area here. And they only moved Bakhmut to Chasiv Yar, 12 kilometers. Yeah, so that is why the Ukrainians want to bottle up Russian efforts in urban areas. But again, let's get to the unfortunate news in the Donetsk sector. Um, Looks like the Russians are still held up pretty good up in Touretsk here for the most part. 12th Azov Brigade holding them up pretty good out of Novopatsky, and a lot of fighting still around on the outskirts of Touretsk, though. Russians are still trying to range out, but not getting much success. We talked about this area a lot earlier, focusing on this diamond right here. This was a area where the Ukrainians are holding out the Russians pretty good, but an unfortunately successful Russian motorcycle attack actually progressed 4 kilometers into Ukraine-held territory, and they've created this salient for the most part in the last 2 weeks. Um, Nothing critical. There are other lines of fortification back. The Ukrainians are still building more up in the area, bordering around the fortress city belt. But it's still unfortunate that that did happen, though. I would like to see a pushback, but usually the Ukrainians are trying to preserve the lives of their soldiers more than take ground, right? So you trade ground for lives with the Russians, and hopefully um, this does get worked around and is adapted around too. So that does mean the Ukrainians have lost this ground line of communication physically over the Russians, though. But again, it's not that they're using that much because the Russians have drones, glide bombs, and artillery control over that area too. So the Ukrainians are more likely than anything using these roads to Slovyansk as their main ground lines communications for the rest of the frontier. So that is it from Pokrovsk. Nothing really going on the east salient here. It's been pretty much, I mean, the Russians did rotate in some new forces and have been trying to push out, though, but the only real success they've had is pushing into Shevchenko a little bit more. Pischane is still contested. Zavrov? Zivrove? They tried pushing into, but it's contested still. They did take Uspanivka. That's about it. So it's nothing really too much to worry about. Russians are still grinding out slowly from Vilko Novosilka. But again, you can't see a whole lot of progress by the Russians there. It's a lot of open field. Nothing new out of Zaporizhzhia or the Kherson Delta is kind of my shorthand for that, though. But that's about it on the map, guys. So let's get over to the brief here and press on with the show. Okay, here's the PowerPoint. We'll be covering from the 26th of May to the 1st of June, which, as of the recording of the show, was about a day and a half ago. So, okay, for anyone new over on Spotify, we cover content that was published by the Institute for the Study of War, and I try to take the best notes I can out of their notes that they publish publicly for people to consume, and try to condense it down into a PowerPoint to present an overview of the macro scale of the war. There are particular things here and there I will sometimes dive into, which is why I read the articles and publications. But and also looking at the combat footage that gives us a micro lens into the greater macro presentation that the ISW brief presents. So we kind of have a little bit of both. We kind of dive in and then pull out, kind of look at things a little bit wider too in certain aspects. So it's kind of dynamic that way as far as an intellectual exercise goes, but it's still stimulating at the same time, I think. But anyway, we're also avid supporters of Third Assault. So anyway, so we'll start with the fronts first. We'll go kind of how we present the map there, clockwise from north to east to south. So over in the border area here. It was stated by the Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service that Ukraine forces maintain some positions in Kursk and Belgorod, like we showed. And it was also said that Belarus is keeping roughly 2,000 military personnel along the Belarusian and Ukrainian international border to pin Ukrainian forces there. There was some good-hearted effort by some of the people in our chat about the potential for a Russian invasion through Belarus again. Um, I push back against that. I just haven't seen any convincing evidence of that. They have tried to present some, and how to put it. I'm not taking anything away from their efforts, obviously, but it wasn't convincing enough for me to say that. And then reading this from Ukraine's foreign intelligence service, 2,000 people is enough to invade Ukraine, obviously, though. So I wouldn't really worry about another thrust from the Russians in that area. It was also said from a source affiliated with Ukrainian military intel that Russian offensive activity is intensifying in northern Sumy, like we showed. And the former head of Ukraine's, again, foreign intelligence service offered a hypothesis that Russian forces are likely concentrating in Sumy Oblast, sorry, in order to attempt to create a salient between Yunikivka, which is right here, and so let me find my spot again. Vodolahe. Get rid of that. So I don't know exactly where that's at, but you can kind of see them developing that salient right here a little bit. So I imagine it's probably to the west right here. Um, I imagine it's because it looks like one of the main roads runs that way. So the Russians want to grab that road and try to push into Sumy. That's about it, and they're doing with about 50,000 soldiers there. Out of Kharkiv front, guys, pretty quiet for the most part, considering what we did see prior to their failure in Vovchansk. The Ukrainian brigade operating in Vovchansk reported that Russians are conducting more assaults in and near Vovchansk and near Lipsy, Tyke, and the Vovchansky Kotori. No idea where that's at, but it's obviously near Vovchansk. Spokesman for the stated the Russian forces are concentrating personnel and equipment in the Kharkiv and installing electronic warfare systems on trees and poles. It was also said that Russian forces are attempting to mitigate the threat of Ukrainian drones by attacking on motorcycles and ATVs to outmaneuver the drones, but that Russian forces are struggling to hear the sound of approaching drones over their engine. And this again the reason why we're seeing the development of Russian doctrine around speed over mass, I would say, is because the drones have been so effective against lumbering APCs, IFVs, and tanks. The Russians haven't really found a good, solid way of defending their vehicles from cheaper drones. So now they just leverage the mass of people they have in their country and give them cheap motorcycles and just throw them forward in a small motorcycle blitz assault in some of these other areas, which sometimes is successful. We can't deny that. But at the same time, it's cheap, suicidal, and really just relying on pure chance and volume of men thrown at the front to even get any toehold in any place they might go. Anyway, the deputy commander of the Ukrainian artillery battalion in the Kharkiv direction stated that Russian forces are using Lancet loitering munitions less often now, but have significantly increased their use of FPV drones with fiber optic cables. So, all right, over towards Luhansk, guys. We talked about the Russians moving to Stroivka. Ukraine brigade in the Lima direction reported that Russian forces continue to conduct infantry-led, highly attritional assaults and are leveraging prisoner recruits again. It's a little bit of heritage from Wagner again. That same spokesman stated that Russian forces are using prisoner recruits, recently mobilized service members, likely referring to forces generated through Russia's crypto mobilization efforts, and service members who recently signed Russian MOD contracts. So a lot of newbies, criminals, and duped Russians, it sounds like. It was also stated that Russian forces are using summer foliage to hide from Ukrainian drones and observe that elements of two unspecified Russian divisions operate in the Lima direction. The Kupiansk direction, Russian forces on the left bank of the Oskil River, which is right here, and roughly where the Russians were. You can kind of see just the small beachheads that the Russians have established in Zapadne, Dolrichna, and Kamyanka a little bit here. So anyway, glad they highlighted that. The Russians are sending small infantry groups to sneak past Ukrainian positions and trying to accumulate for larger assaults on the west bank in order to cut off Ukrainian logistics across the river. The soldier reported that Russian soldiers primarily conduct assaults on motorcycles and are husbanding armored vehicles due to heavy losses. So again, like we talked about with the motorcycles, they're trying to keep them because based on some open source intelligence on the, how to put it, the depots where they keep their vehicles. There's a major absence of a lot of Russian vehicles that were out there before the war, and it is showing even up in just the absence of any vehicles outside of the garages. Again, you can't see inside because you're looking from a satellite down, but based off the estimation of losses and the visually confirmed losses that Oryx reports, on Russian tanks and IFVs and stuff, the Russians are pretty much at the bottom of the barrel now. Yeah, so that does it for Luhansk. We got one more slide here. Ukrainian brigade in the Lima direction again reported on the 26th and 27th that Russian assaults and redeployments of new troops have been put there to replace losses, and that indicates that the Russian military may be prioritizing the Liban direction. Uh, Liman being, again, this area right here. I don't know if I would really support that because the main push is north. Haven't seen too much action west of Kremenna. See a lot more action out of the Siversk salient, so that would be a very generous idea that the Russians are trying to flank north and south of Lehman there. But anyway, brigade reported that Russian units near Lehman are manned at 70 to 90% of their doctrinal end strength. And he said a spokesman for another brigade in the same area reported that Russian forces are primarily conducting assaults in small groups with drone and artillery support. Um, Spokesman for the Ukrainian Kharkiv grouping of forces, he said that Russian forces are attempting to transfer equipment to the right bank of the Oskil River near Dolvichna in order to intensify operations in the area, but that Ukrainian forces are striking pontoon bridges and equipment attempting to cross the river. Press officer for Ukraine Brigade near Borova, which is in roughly this area right here, I think, um, said that Russian forces are testing new assault tactics cater to certain weather conditions in hopes of scaling up these tactics for future assaults. Russian forces likely seek to conduct maneuvers during weather conditions that degrade Ukraine forces' ability to use drones. So it'd be like storms or nighttime, or when the fog lifts off the ground, typically in spring and fall, sort of thing. Provides the Russians cover to advance. Russian blogger claimed that elements of the Russian 25th Combined Arms Army from the Central Military District are providing false reports of advances in the Lehman area. The Bill blogger claimed that on the 26th to 25th, CAA command made false claims of successes near Torske and wasted manpower in efforts to make these claims of advance real, which is kind of funny because I'm pretty sure I heard on a Russian channel some of these same reports of success. So it really does reveal a lot of Russian Russophiles, I guess is the best way to put it. Um, the media messaging that they're all on the same page with is that it comes from the MOD downward to their media outlets. Anyway, so it's false reporting based off what we're seeing here, which it cannot be visually confirmed. Anyway, Russian Bill bloggers previously heavily criticized the commander of the 3rd CAA and its subordinate brigades for exaggerating claimed advances and obfuscating the extent of Russian military losses following several failed large mechanized assaults in the fall of 2024. Again, this was in the Sibirsk salient area. The Russians have a really bad problem of over-reporting their successes in some major sectors. It's led to a lot of generals being removed, some being tossed out windows. Anyway, the Russian MOD reportedly arrested and replaced the 3rd CEA commander, Major General Dmitry Ovcharov, and several brigade commanders in November and December 2024, likely due to the information space outcry. The Mill bloggers May 26th and 30th complaints suggest that Russian forces in the area continue to misinform the higher military command and exaggerating the battlefield successes. Up the chain remains a pervasive part of Russia's military culture, again, in the Siversk area. So it's very likely Belhorivka is still contested, or maybe even Ukrainian hands. Got very little news out of Donetsk, guys, aside from the area here. We talked about the salient northeast of Pokrovsk, but that's really about it in the last week here. Nothing really new at Toretsk or Chasiv Yar. Spokesman for Ukraine Brigade in the Pokrovsk direction stated that Russian attacks in the area have become less intense, but that Russian forces may be preparing for a renewed offensive operations. It was noted that Russian forces are relying on recently recruited and poorly trained service members to replace personnel losses. It's been said that these new recruits are getting up to 2 weeks of training typically. Commander of Ukraine Battalion operating the Pokrovsk direction reported on May 28th. Russian forces have increased their use of FPV drones, and that Russian drone operators are sometimes able to go 15 to 20 kilometers behind the front line. And Russian Mill blogger claimed that Russian forces operating the Pokrovsk direction are deploying small mobile groups in civilian vehicles like their loaf vans, in civilian vehicles and buggies to down Ukrainian drones with small arms. So I had to take a sip of water sometimes. Spokesman for another Ukraine brigade in the Kurakove direction reported on May 29th that fiber optic drones are a significant impediment to movement along the front and that Russian forces can operate fiber optic drones up to 20 kilometers from their positions. So we did show in the combat footage last night that Ukrainian drone operators are operating 40 kilometers plus behind the line with fiber optic drones. But it just shows the great, I mean, cumulatively on both sides, if Russia could start pushing that envelope to 40 kilometers, you're going to have off the contact line from point to point a diameter of 80 kilometers where you could really say you're in a combat zone. Because if drones can reach that further back in your line, you can do the same to them. That's a huge amount of area that you could obviously say is a war zone. Anyway, it's amazing the dynamics of this war. It goes to show that what it could be called the near rear areas are close to, would that be almost 50 miles ish, 40 miles to the rear, and that's a huge amount of space. Anyway, in Kherson Zaporizhzhia, guys, Ukraine's Southern Defense Forces spokesman reported that Russian forces are intensifying assaults towards Orkiv, which is a major city for the defense of Zaporizhzhia for the Ukrainians. Stated that Russian forces are attacking small groups and that Russian military has supplied each company with roughly 90 service members with 30 motorcycles each. So that's been kind of their doctrinal end strength, it seems like, for Russian assault units. So you figure that each company is about 90 people, roughly, about 90 to 100 people with about 30 motorcycles. So that's kind of a staple I'm going to try to keep in my head just to remember the statistics that are quoted sometimes in the information space. Anyway, stated by Ukraine military observer Konstantin Mashevets on May 13th, the Russian military is working to equip each battalion with up to 30 motorcycles, each platoon with up to 9 motorcycles, and each company with 15 motorcycles. And an officer of the Ukraine brigade operating in western Zaporizhzhia reported that Russian forces are fielding drones with increased ranges that are striking between 20 to 30 kilometers behind the front line. So all right, so that does it for the front updates, guys. Pressing on into the Operation Spiderweb. This was the spectacular success of the Ukrainian intelligence forces, mainly the SBU, as I understand it, and the visually confirmed bases that were hit include Elena Air Base in Murmansk, the Irkutsk, I'm sorry, the Belaya Air Base in Irkutsk Oblast, the Diaghilevo Air Base in Ryazan, which is south, yeah, south of Moscow, and then the Ivanovo Air Base in Ivanovo Oblast, which is north of Moscow there. This is one of the largest and simultaneous series of airstrikes that was conducted by Ukrainian drones in the entire war. The SBU sources confirmed that Ukraine drone operators struck 41 Russian strategic aircraft, including A-50 long-range radar detection aircraft and Tupolev-95 and Tupolev-22 Mark III strategic bombers. These are fixed-wing aircraft that Russia uses to detect. I'm sorry, that is oddly worded. The A-50 is used as a methods of AWACS, so I don't know why they. Anyway, the Tupolev 95 and the Tupolev 22 are their strategic bombers they use to launch missiles at Ukraine. The A-50 being or the Antonov 50, being the aircraft they use for AWACS. Sorry, that was worded a little oddly from ISW there. The SBU reported that the operation inflicted roughly $7 billion worth of damage on Russia, and the SBU sources confirmed that the SBU facilitated the drone strikes by transporting the FPV drones to Russia at an unspecified time, storing the FPV drones in trucks carrying cargo units with retractable roofs, and parking the trucks near the Russian air bases and remotely operating the roofs and launching the FPVs. Zelensky confirmed the operation used 117 drones and destroyed 34% of Russia's strategic cruise missile carriers, which is a major leg of their nuclear triad. Um, Zelensky also stated that Ukrainian authorities withdrew the people who assisted Ukraine from with the operation from Russia before it commenced. So they had a 100% survival survival rating on the side of the Ukrainian operators. There was some footage of a Russian truck driver that's strangulated with a zip tie, purple face as you can imagine. But that was those truck drivers were contacted via cell phone and told to drive these trucks and these containers to certain points on roads. And the guy that was strangulated was just more or less ignorant of what he was doing. He was being paid through a shell company to drive that container with his truck and delivered it. But then the guy that got pissed off at him, seeing his precious strategic bombers being destroyed as a civilian, strangulated a more or less ignorant and innocent Russian truck driver because he thought he was in compliance or what's the right term? Being an accomplice in the whole thing. Anyway, uh, do, do, do. Russian MOD claimed that Ukrainian forces conducted FPV drone strikes against air bases in Irkutsk, Murmansk, and causing several aircraft to catch fire. The Russian MOD claimed the Russian forces repelled all strikes against bases in Ivanovo, Ryazan, and Amur oblasts. I think the Ryazan and Amur ones we have not gotten footage out of yet. That Russian authorities reportedly linked Russian opposition outlet Media Zona um, reported that Ukrainian authorities plan to conduct APV drone strikes against the airbase in Amur Oblast. And Russian sources also claimed that a truck carrying APV drones near the Ukrainka airbase in Amur Oblast. I'm sorry, that's the one in the far east here. As you can see on the far right side of the picture there, that's where they were stopped. Um, that one caught fire before Ukrainian forces could launch the drones. There was an interesting thing to these containers too. They had a self-destructive mechanism installed in them, so it was likely an executive decision was made where that container was self-destructed due to whatever might have happened. There might have been a technical problem, a communications error, something. Who knows? But yeah, so that all these containers that were transported by these trucks were destroyed on site too, to destroy any evidence, that sort of thing. That was really just flawlessly done in a lot of ways. It was awesome. Ukraine continues to innovate its drone technology and tactics to achieve operational surprise and successfully target Russian military infrastructure in the rear. The SBU is reportedly able to launch the APV drones to target Russian air bases, which likely enabled the FPV drones to evade Russian electronic warfare systems and deny Russian air defenders enough time to detect the drones. The SBU innovative use of semi-trucks to launch the FPV drone directly in Russian territory enabled Ukrainian drone operators to strike targets deep in Russia's rear and conduct the first drone strike during the war against a target in Siberia. SBU's tactics to use FPV drones and not aircraft type long range drones also allow drone operators to maintain operational surprise to inflict maximum damage and minimize Russia's response window. Yeah, this is interesting because we do know obviously how porous the American border is to the south, and we obviously have hostile elements within the country. This sort of thing could easily happen in Arizona. I think that's where our B2 fleet is based out of, or even in Diego Garcia. There's clear footage of our bombers being posted on the island without any sort of overhead cover. Um, if some sort of, because the natives there are called Chagosians, it's another one of these admixture races that were created out of the ether from the history of British being in that area, because they needed laborers. They brought in Africans, Indians, and some other Polynesians from the other islands. Kind of threw them all together into one community, and over time they homogenized into this new identity called the Chagosians. Anyway, there's a lot of back and forth about that, about how legitimate their claims are to Diego Garcia, but we're stepping past that. If some of these people were resentful of the Americans being there and having a base on what they call their island, um, they could easily do something like this too, but the cost would be $2 billion per airplane, and we got six of them there right now, I think. About a third of our air fleet's stationed over in Diego Garcia right now with those bombers. So, anyway, this is very cheap and very possible. That could easily happen to European nations, to the Chinese also. This is going to be a dimension of warfare that I don't think any real nation state is fully ready for. This is the asymmetry of modern technology that little nations can definitely punch way above their weight class now. Um, this is the new dynamic going, I think, going into the century, and everyone was predicting a Chinese century. I think we're seeing the reversal of that in a weird way. It's not, saying Russia's definitely declining, but the projection of China to become the hegemon of the world, I just don't see it happening. We're seeing how, again, the asymmetry of smaller nations can definitely inflict damage on bigger countries, and the idea of that is it's going to drag everyone else down to a more horizontal playing field to where the pain of warfare is going to be felt by many people in any country, anywhere. Yeah, it's a different definition of total war in a weird way, and anyway, I'll leave it at that though. It kind of puts a nice little bow on top of everything. But what we also saw, one last note though, is that we saw the underperformance because of the high expectations of the Indian Air Force against the Pakistani Air Force. But the numbers floating around was five aircraft being shot down. One of their air ministers publicly said it was six. So it's just another case of a smaller nation punching above their weight class again against a much larger nation, but the smaller nation coming out on top, relatively speaking. Um, that's just two interesting data points I see, and I'm kind of interested to see if China does try to invade Taiwan, how well Taiwan will do, because we're seeing a trend, at least with two data points like that in these hot conflicts, um, inflicting outsized damage relative to their station, really. Same thing with the Houthis. Same thing with Hamas and Israel. Depending on how you look at that. But smaller actors are definitely damaging out of proportion to what should be possible for them against larger actors. Anyway, okay. Ukraine's drone strike operation against strategic Russian aircraft may at least temporarily constrain Russia's ability to conduct long-range drone and missile strikes into Ukraine. Last few days leading up to that operation, there was a strike in Ukraine that killed 12 people and injured 60. I forget which city. I think it was Kiev. Um, yeah, these Tupolev 95 bombers. Again, this is an AI picture, but this picture here shows what would be a mock-up. AI sucks. They didn't even get the propellers right. Anyway, um, these turboprop bombers were the primary means of delivering these Kinzhal 101 missiles or KH-101 missiles, which has been ramped up in production and being used against Ukrainian civilians. And by destroying a lot of these platforms, it's definitely going to have a dampening effect on how many sorties these bombers can fly. They're very old bombers. Russia cannot produce these. These are old Soviet legacy aircraft, and yeah. Anyway, it's absolute win, and this is something Russia cannot recover from. So, Ukraine's June 1st operation targeted aircraft that Russia uses to launch cruise missiles against Ukraine in airborne early warning and control, the AEW and C systems. That'd be the Antonov 50 that was damaged or destroyed. That Russia used to identify Ukrainian air systems and coordinate Russian fighter jet targeting. Russia regularly deploys Tupolev 95 and Tupolev 22 M5 or M3, sorry, to launch the Kinzhal 101 or KH-55, depending on how you designate them, and the KH-5969 cruise missiles against Ukraine. The downing of a Russian A-50 aircraft has previously temporarily constrained Russian aviation activities over Ukraine, and on June 1st, the Ukraine drone operators will force these Russian officials to consider redistributing Russia's air defense systems to cover as much wider range of territory and possibly deploying mobile air defense groups that were more quickly able to react in Ukraine, probably further back into Russia. So this is again using Russia's size against them um, by opening up the targeting selection to everything militarily in Russia. That means that Russia has to cover all their bases. That means the immediate front in Ukraine is going to be much thinner in air defense. That means the Ukrainian drone successes will be much higher. So it's just interesting, if you're a boxer, going for the body shot instead for the head shot typically because people like to aim for the head. But you put those body blows in, that will lower the defense around the head, and they'll allow you to put those hits in the brain bucket, so to speak. Russia will likely struggle to replace the aircraft that Ukrainian forces damaged and destroyed. Forbes reported in September 2025 that a single A-50 cost roughly $500 million. Dollars. Okay, another source said 300, but okay. So it's from Forbes in September 2023. They cost $500 million for Russia. The Kyiv reported on June 1st that Russia has fewer than 10 of these A-50s left in operation. I think the other number was 5 to 6 in operation. And you have to remember, you'd have to have one on the ground and one in the air typically. Probably more than that. Maybe two on the ground for everyone flying. So they might have at any one time two of these flying. In a country the size of Russia, you need a fleet of these to have an effective AWACS um, fleet. Really, you got to cover Japan, you got to cover Central Asia, you got to cover North Europe, the Caucasus, Ukraine, and then the Arctic, and all. Using Russia's size against it is the best way to put it. And with the small amount of aircraft that they have left as a handful, um, that's a major weakness. If they don't have eyes on and anything incoming, that creates a strategic vulnerability even in the nuclear realm. So they're not able to really have a first strike package option as well as they had before because these Tupolev bombers are burned or destroyed. And now that they don't have as many of these AWACS aircraft, they won't be able to see what's coming at them as well either. Russia's very, very vulnerable because of this. Ukrainian military observer Yuri Budasov stated on June 1st that Ukrainian forces destroyed some strategic aircraft that Russia does not currently produce. A Kremlin-affiliated mill blogger claimed that Russia no longer produces chassis for the Tupolev 95 or Tu-22 bombers, and know that the chassis are impossible to replace. The Economist reported that Russia likely has fewer than 90 operational Tupolev 22, Tupolev 95, and Tu-160s in total. These are their swing wing design bombers, similar to the American B-1B bomber. It was another 1970s fever dream of aircraft design. Ukrainian sources have recently noted that Russia is increasingly using Sukhoi aircraft and not strategic bombers to launch cruise missiles. And Russia likely turned to Sukhoi aircraft so as not to risk their strategic bombers, suggesting that Russia is concerned about its limited quantities of their strategic bombers. So, continuing on with Russia's bad week, there was some bridge failures that happened too that result in some derailments. Um, I'm not suggesting that Operation Spiderweb overlaps these two target sets, but it's definitely an interesting parallel. It's probably two different operations, I would say, but that's just my thoughts. Russian officials blamed Ukraine for the collapse of two bridges and subsequent train derailments in western Russia on May 31st. Likely it's part of efforts to justify the recent launch of Russian offensive operations in Sumy Oblast and the Kremlin's disinterest in peace negotiations to end the war. Two railway bridges in Bryansk and Kursk collapsed on the night of May 31st, causing two trains to derail. It stated that from the Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation, they responded to the derailment, stating that Russia may be conducting false flag operations to disrupt the peace process and prolong the war. I don't know if I really believe that, but that's just me. Russian officials and mill bloggers largely blamed Ukraine for the collapsed bridges, but did not provide any evidence to support these claims. So both sides are kind of pointing at each other again. Could be also that Russia's infrastructure is just failing, but two bridge collapses in one day is pretty suspect. Russian State Duma deputy Andrei Kolosenk claimed that Russia should respond harshly and not limit its response to train derailments. There was some stuff going on about Russia nuking Kyiv in response to the strategic bombers being hit, and also these train derailments being quote terrorist acts. Anyway, um, His call for Russia to create a vast buffer zone in Ukraine to protect Russia from Ukrainian attacks, and for Russia to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine and to reestablish, a lot of air quotes here, and reestablish the Ukrainian state, a reference to Russia's original war aims to replace the current Ukrainian government with a Russian proxy. Russian Bill blog responded to the State Duma member here, claiming that Russia should create a buffer zone that extends to western Ukraine, and that Ukraine should exist as a rump state with its capital in Lviv. Anyway, Ukraine authorities recently reported that Russia has deployed 125,000 personnel to the borders of Sumy and Kharkiv oblasts, two oblasts in which Russian forces are conducting offensive operations that Russian officials have framed as part of efforts to create buffer zones. So by hitting these rail lines and collapsing these bridges, that fucks up their logistics immensely. ISW continues to assess that Russian offensive efforts in Sumy and Kharkiv oblasts demonstrate that the Kremlin's territorial ambitions are not limited to the seizure of Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson oblasts, and that Russia is attempting to delay negotiations and prolong the war in order to make additional battlefield gains. And Russian officials appear to be claiming that Ukraine is responsible for the train derailments, at least partly in order to justify Russia's recent offensive operations in Sumy. Anyway, okay. Leading up to that, ISW has been doing pretty good with publishing these missile graphs here. Uh, Russia reached a new high. So the blue is drones, the orange is missiles. So you see about every 3-4 weeks, roughly, you see a few missiles being launched every week or so. You might have a handful every other night, but when you actually see them being deployed in more than just 10, it comes in series. And we saw the general trend up to, let me see here, was that the beginning of 2025, it looks like. Um, Kind of peaking at a little below 270, 280, right? Kind of dips down a little bit more, but then we see it from the beginning of. Oh, I'm sorry. This is all April. My bad. So this goes back to the beginning of 2025. My bad. So in February, March, we had a little below 300. It kind of dips down into early May, where we even had one day we didn't have anything because that was so-called truce. And then it just ramps up immensely up towards the end of May here. So, not knowing if that's going to, we'll have to see again just over long term and observe this, if that's going to be the new trend where Russia is going to be launching, close to 300 plus drones a night in some cases. Most of the, obviously, daily is going to be below 100, but that's just kind of the general background noise that Russia is able to produce with the drones they launch. Supposedly, Russia is able to produce about 100 Sahi drones a day. So that's why they're able to maintain, around 50 to 100 every night. But then obviously try to crest that up every once in a while up to 200. So that explains the trends there a little bit better for you guys. Russian forces conducted their largest combined drone and missile attack of the war that included over 400 drones against Ukraine on the night of May 31st to June 1st. Um, yeah. Ukrainian armed forces reported that Russian forces launched three Iskander missiles from Kursk and Voronezh Oblast, a number of other missiles. I won't get into all the details, but it does show that the Russians tried to retaliate when this thing happened. Russia's strikes against Ukraine continues to disproportionately impact civilians and civilian infrastructure. Zelensky stated on the 26th that Russia launched over 900 drones against Ukraine over the last 3 days, which is indicating this part of the graph right here. And that intensified Russian strikes have a significant political meaning. Zelensky stated that Putin is choosing to continue the war rather than engage in a meaningful peace negotiations. There's no evidence that Russia is considering a diplomatic end to the war. Again, this was all leading up to the June 1st meeting in, well, Turks call it Istanbul, we call it Constantinople here on the show, but meeting in Istanbul for another conference between the Russians and Ukrainian delegations face to face. But yeah, so with the ramp up of these drone attacks going into that, and then the night before, this huge spike in attacks on May 31st, both sides were trying to set the tone for the conference there. So the Russians were just droning in, missiling like they usually do. Ukraine's saying, well, fuck you, we're just going to blow up your bombers. I imagine both sides didn't have a whole lot to say to each other, but there was supposedly going to be another prisoner exchange here pretty soon. So that's about all these things are really resulting in is humanitarian exchanges. Russia's increased missile stockpiling, drone production, and drone adaptations demonstrate Russia's commitment to achieving its war goals through military means in a protracted war with Ukraine. Um, the Economist report on the 25th of May that Ukrainian government sources estimate that Russia has a stockpile of about 500 ballistic missiles. It was also reported by the Economist that Russia is increasing its drone production of Shahed drones, and again can produce about 100 drones a day, roughly 4 to 5 times their assessed daily production rate in late 2025. Sorry, 2024. Ukrainian military intelligence told the Economist that Russia plans to increase its production up to 500 drones a day by an unspecified future deadline. Russia, I don't know, that's pretty generous. Um, there's an article I have later in the article section at the end of the show. Russia is having a hard time scaling up their war economy. They are having some success in optics and other things like that, higher end technologies, but there's only so much supply out there that they can grab while being sanctioned by Western economies. Um, Ukraine's drone engineers reported that Russia is actively innovating and adapting its Shahed drones to circumvent Ukrainian air defenses, including using artificial intelligence and Ukrainian internet and mobile internet networks for navigation to prevent Ukrainian electronic warfare interference. So, using civilian infrastructure against Ukrainians. Um, Korean officer told The Economist that Russian drones are flying up to 2 to 2,500 meters in the air, which is out of range of small caliber guns and shoulder-fired missiles that Ukrainian mobile air defense crews use. Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation stated on the 25th that Russian forces recently set a new Shahed flight altitude record of 4,900 meters. Just because I can't do math and I don't know my conversions here, we'll do meters to feet here. Just look that up really quick here, guys. That is 16,000 feet. That's impressive. That's about halfway up to where most airliners fly at about 30,000 plus feet. Sorry. Most skydivers only ever get up to 10,000 feet, so that's pretty high. And obviously, that being that high in the air, you're not going to see it. That's just too small. Anyway, so that's pretty impressive. Let me see here. Russia is increasing its production of both Shahed and drone decoys, and that Russia is also flying drones at higher altitudes, like we already talked about. Anyway, it kind of goes on a little bit more what we already mentioned, but that's the end of the drone stuff there a little bit. Ukrainian intelligence also says that Russia is facing a number of critical constraints in its economy and on the battlefield, in line with ISW's ongoing assessments. Um, Ivashenko, sorry, I think I took out his credentials prior to getting this noted in my logbook here. Anyway, he stated that Russia's sovereign wealth fund has fallen from its pre-war levels about 150 billion to about 38 billion dollars. That Russia's gold and foreign currency reserves are also decreasing. Um, there's an interesting caveat to the foreign currency reserves. I don't think I put that in the notes for the end of the show here, but I did read something which is interesting. Russia holds a lot of old American banknotes, and because of a act, again, this is around the time the Federal Reserve Act was also enacted, but in 1914, very important year for banking and warfare. Anyway, won't get into my history nerd right now, but that I'll put that hat away right now. But in 1914, there was a currency act that was stipulated that any currency that was ever printed by the American Treasury can be honored throughout the whole of time, basically. So from that point forward, anyone that has a banknote that had Federal Reserve Bank on it, it was good. It was good legal tender. And the problem is that other banks don't honor that though. So Russia has all these old greenbacks in their banks still as foreign currency reserves, but not many banks want to exchange those banknotes because of risk and sanctions and this whole thing. And that means that the liquidity of the remaining 38 billion is a little harder to cash out. There's a lot of these little stories of how and what's left in the sovereign wealth fund for Russia. It's not as easy to access. Another caveat to that, though, is that some of the money, some of the tens of billions left, is tied up in investments in the Russian economy and stuff like that, right? Some of these corporations and infrastructure projects, they'd have to pull that money out. They'd have to liquidate these investments to make it solvent, I guess, if that's the right term, so they can access that money and then spend it in what they want in the war, or whatever might be their immediate need for it. So they have a lack of liquidity with some of the cash reserves they have, and some of these investments are hard to liquidate because they're in projects that are active. So what's left to really access is actually lower than the number given, I would say. So it's just an interesting caveat to the economics of the Russian wealth fund there. Uh, Ivashenko noted that Russia is suffering from serious labor shortages, which are causing problems in the Russian economy, and that Russian authorities are trying to avoid paying the financial incentives that Russia's offering new military recruits. He also stated that roughly 80% of the equipment that Russian forces are using is refurbished from Russia's Soviet-era stockpiles, and that only about 20% of the equipment is modern on the battlefield for Russia. He also The statements are in line with ISW's ongoing assessments that Russia faces many constraints, and the Russian defense industrial base will struggle to sustain Russia's current equipment and ammunition burn rates in the future, and that Putin has mismanaged Russia's economy, which is suffering from increased and unsustainable war spending, growing inflation, and significant labor shortages and reductions in Russia's sovereign wealth fund. Um, I do have an article about the strength of the ruble. It's kind of an interesting thought experiment. We'll go into that a little bit more because economics is very much a part of war. Russia's own defense industrial limitations are pushing Russia to rely on its allies and partners to find cheap solutions to adapt to Ukraine's drone and counter drone capabilities, which leans into North Korea providing 120 of their own M1989 Koksan self-propelled artillery systems. I think these are 170 millimeters, really weird caliber, and some of the MLRS launchers that Russia's got from North Korea also. It was also stated that the PRC is supplying machines, chemicals, gunpowder, components, and aviation equipment to at least 20 Russian defense industrial enterprises, and that 80% of the critical electronics in Russia are Chinese made. Ivashenko stated that Belarus is producing ammunition for Russia and that the Belarusian and Russian DABs are largely integrated. Russian forces are increasingly supplying the frontline units with motorcycles and Chinese and Russian-made buggies for use in assaults. Um, Talked about that earlier. And Russia's extensive use of modifications to its long-range Shahed drones and decoys demonstrate that Russia is trying to adapt to Ukraine's successful countermeasures that are effectively repelling Russian drone strikes. Anyway, Russia's learning lessons about how to adapt its drone and missile strike packages to most effectively penetrate a large air defense umbrella and deplete the air defense missile stockpiles, and Russia will carry out these lessons in any future conflict. All right, going into Ukraine here. I think this is near the bottom of the stack for the headlines here, guys. Ukrainian defense manufacturer and an official announcement that Ukraine has fielded a long-range drone with a sophisticated AI, which is why I put the Terminator drone there. Um, Forbes reported on the 26th that Ukrainian startup company Strategy Force Solutions chief technology officer Andrei stated that Ukrainian forces fielded the company's artificial intelligence-powered mothership drone, the Gogol M, um, an on autonomous missions and against Russian military targets for the first time. The Gogol M, Gogol TAC M mothership drone can reportedly deploy two FPV drones with automated target acquisition and strike capabilities. The mothership drone reportedly has a range of 300 kilometers for one-way missions and a range of 100 kilometers for return to reuse, which makes sense. The mothership and compatible FPV drones reportedly use the Strategy Force Solutions Smart Pilot System that leverages a combination of advanced sensors and AI to self-orient and execute predefined missions autonomously. That's a little scary. Um, like, where's the human in that decision cycle? Anyway, the mothership and FPV drones notably do not rely on global positioning systems and thereby optimizing their electronic warfare resistance. Um, hmm. Yeah, anyway, there's a lot of stuff with that. I'm not going to pick it apart, but yeah. Anyway, Andre told Forbes that Strategy Force Solutions is able to produce up to 50 of these mothership drones, up to 400 compatible FPV drones per month. Decent number. Um, Ukrainian Digital Transformation Minister Mikhailo Fedorov confirmed on the 29th of May that Ukraine fielded the mother drone ship for the first time. And lastly, Western reporting indicates that PRC is increasing drone deliveries to Russia while reducing sales to Ukrainian Western buyers, further demonstrating China's increasingly overt support for Russia's war effort against Ukraine. Um, Basically, a reduction in the PRC selling DJI Mavic drones and quadcopters to the West. So, all right, some mobilization stuff for Russia here, guys. Russian recruiters continue to offer Russian recruits low quality and effective military training before deploying them to Ukraine. Russian military observer visited a Moscow military district training center. Reported on May 18th that Russian contract servicemen undergo only a week-long basic military training and spend another 2 weeks in training centers in occupied Ukraine. So effectively 3 weeks. And this is from a Russian military observer, not any Ukrainian. The observer stated that Russian instructors have only limited combat knowledge and cannot adequately prepare servicemen for war. And he also stated that Russian recruits train in small numbers of 4 to 5 men due to the continuous threat of Ukrainian drones and Russia's inability to establish tactical air superiority. He also stated that Russian military commanders expect recruits to know how to operate machine guns and mortars, conduct successful assaults at Ukrainian positions, recognize minefields, learn tactical medicine techniques, and familiarize themselves with radio communications. You, you really can't do that all in just a whole 3 weeks. Anyway, yeah. And at that point, you're just cramming. You're not going to retain any of that information, really. The observer also stated that recruits would realistically need at least 7 days to learn how to use one weapon, and at least 4 days to learn engineering and assault techniques. The Russian MOD and its main director of combat training have not reprioritized improving military training since at least 2024. Russian bloggers similarly observed in 2024 that recruits received 14 to 16 days of training, of which only 4 to 5 days constituted real training, whatever that means. Russian bloggers also observed in December 2024 that the Russian Ministry of Defense Andrei Belousov did not issue a decree formalizing training requirements and timeframes, meaning that Russian tactical training levels depend on whether a given unit received orders from operational level grouping of forces commands. Anyway, Russian DI Defense Industrial Base, or DIB, is reportedly not producing sufficient military equipment for recruit training. Um, yeah, that's enough said. I won't get into all the details though, but they are saying that the Russian manufacturers are unwilling to risk scaling up weapons production before obtaining contracts, and implied that Russian high interest rates of 21% is further impeding independent weapon production initiatives. So that's really important right there because the Russian central bank, forgot her name. Anyway, she set the loan from the central bank. Their loan rate, interest rate, sorry, is at 21%, which means if you go to other banks down the chain, down to their we are loaning out to the general public, the interest rates are going to be higher than 21%. So because it's so high, it's unprofitable, or these companies would be operating at a loss because they have to pay off these high interest rate loans. And that really means that Russia can't scale up anymore. Um, if these new defense enterprises can't build new infrastructure, can't support these new startups, there's a certain cap at where Russia can't even produce any more ammunition, drones, aircraft, bullets, tanks, anything. So they've already reached that ceiling, right? The West, obviously, the sky's the limit still, but that's the weird thing. Like Russia has reached the cap of what they can produce every month, every year, because their own bank is limiting the ability for Russia to expand that defense industrial base, obviously, because they need to keep the economy afloat. But the West, in its cowardice, I don't know, it's so many things wrong with it, is not willing to give Ukraine the weapons and means and material to really push the war over the edge to end it on favorable terms for Ukraine. Um, case in point right here, it's just like they can't even supply their recruits with decent weapons, and that interest rate is fucking up their economy. Anyway, it's, you get what I'm saying. Russian recruits appear to be suffering significant casualties because of poor training, equipment shortages, and systematic misuse of assault units in combat. Former Storm Z instructor and mill blogger claimed on April 13th that poor training of recruits is limiting Russia's ability to conduct any other operations aside from meat assaults, and that Russia is suffering high losses because the Russian military command does not have sufficient time to properly train recruits. The Storm Z instructor also noted that Russian forces lack training for drone specialists, and that the Russian military command is misusing such specialists as infantry. Um, it was also complained that the Russian military's commitment of junior officers and military specialists to assaults is reducing Russia's training capacity and is eliminating junior Russian command staff. And it was also observed that Russian military doctrine reserves assault operations for highly experienced personnel, as assault units often have to seize important infrastructure such as airports and military bases. Interesting. Um, so they're keeping some of their more experienced personnel for higher strategic means, I guess. Anyway, if they plan on doing that, I doubt it. But anyway, the bill blogger implied that poor training and ineffective military leadership diluted the function of assault units and degraded the appeal of service for in specialized assault units because they're being treated so poorly. Anyway, a couple of bullet points here, guys. Russian officials reportedly recorded nearly 50,000 cases of desertion between early 2022 and late 2024. So it's probably 50,000 plus change now, because we're halfway through 2025 now. It was also reported that the Russian Ministry of Labor and Social Protection reportedly ordered more than 1.5 million combat veteran certificates for Russian servicemen and over 300,000 combat veteran certificates for families of deceased service members since 2022. That is an interesting number because that kind of shows that the Russian military is trying to pay out to families and the benefits thereof. 300,000 dead at least. That's just the ones that are being paid out. We've reported that. Let me think, I'm trying to think right here. Convicts, the partially mobilized, some other like even foreign nationals aren't getting their payouts, and even the people in Donetsk and Luhansk, People's Republics, air quotes there again, are not getting a lot of these payouts and benefits that they were promised, and that means that the actual death toll is actually much higher than can be confirmed at the moment. But what we're seeing here is that the Russians are paying out a hard bottom of 300,000 uh, veteran certificates for families of these deceased service members since the start of the war. So you could probably estimate, because the hard bottom, I think, for the Donetsk Oblast, this was confirmed from Media Zona, because they go and visit the grave sites, that the DPR and LPR, I think, the hard bottom for their deaths is 20,000. So you figure 320,000 at least dead. Um, and then everywhere else involved in the Russian armed forces, though. So it's approaching, I would say, maybe 400,000 dead on the Russian side. So you figure roughly 110,000, maybe 120,000 dead a year on the Russian side. Again, it was really scaled up after 2022 because that's when offensive operations and the attrition really started setting in. But anyway, so that's the pace of the war. So there's a lot of Russian casualties. As far as Ukraine goes, actually, I haven't looked that up in a while. Let me check on that really quick. Um, there's a website I do use. It's been used by a lot of people. It's UA losses. Let me just look that up really quick. I apologize, guys. Okay, found the site. Looking at it right now. So at the start of the war, um, they're saying, well, the interesting thing is that they include missing. So that's kind of weird because um, a lot when everyone because there has been cases of desertion in Ukraine too. But a lot of these people do return back, and there's this whole legal approach to forgiving people that do desert that come back because it has to do with Manning, the whole story with these things. But again, so including missing, I'll try to keep it abbreviated short here. Um, they're saying a total of 147,000 people are MIA or casualties in the war. So, but the hard bottom for the dead for the Ukrainians is 76,000. There's about 65,000 missing, but again, a lot of them return, and there's about 6,000 POWs. So, but that's the hard bottom there. Looks like interesting. Anyway, so let me just take a look at this a little bit closer here. Anyway, yeah, so they're saying about 76,000. Let me just bring up the articles here. I'm going to do my studio mode here and show it to you because I'll show you what I'm breaking down. Um, yeah, there we are. And okay, come on now. Let me just kill the PowerPoint here because the way it's oriented. Okay, so this is the website right here. What I'm looking right here is this box right here. So the total is right here. Um, they're counting the total amount for this war. The dead right here, 76,000. Missing is about 65,000. Then the POWs is about 6,000. But they also roll in the number from 2014 to 2021, which is true. These are dead, I believe. But then their tally altogether. So yeah, only for the Warriors, about 142,000, casualties. That's what they're counting it as. But yeah, so that's the numbers there. But based off the death certificates we're reading from the Russian side, and what we're seeing, because these guys are counting the faces, the units, the obituaries. A lot of these Ukrainians, you have faces and names all together. Do a lot of these guys, not obviously all of them, but birth dates, when they became deceased. Uh, anyway, so this is very thorough, very very plausible. This is the best. This is the best resource for Ukrainian casualties, and fortunately, unfortunately, you get what I'm saying. But looking at this, the hard bottom is 76,000 for Ukrainian casualties for what is obviously a very very hard war. But at the same time, it's like looking at the casualties they're inflicting on the Russians. That is roughly 4-1, roughly. Yeah. Anyway, so it's good. How to put it? Like, there's so much to go with that though, because the idea is that you want to inflict as much attrition as possible on the Russians. They're kind of meeting that math, at least based off these two numbers right here. We could find other resources though, but this is the best one for Ukraine. I would say the Russian Ministry of Labor publishing that number. That's pretty interesting. That's an interesting admission because they have to pay those things out, and that's that anyway. You get okay. I kicked that horse to death, but that is the casualty death ratio for the Ukrainians and Russians in the war. I know it's a bit ghoulish. It's much more macro, but we're looking at a whole thing here that we have to kind of also compartmentalize and analyze as best as possible and move on. So anyway, a couple more slides here, guys. Then we'll move on to the articles to wrap up the show. Ukrainian mobilization here. The Swedish Ministry of Defense announced on the 26th of May that Sweden's government recently approved roughly $500 million worth of funding to procure material to support Ukraine's defense capabilities. They're allocating I'm sorry. So the package allocates roughly 50 million to Ukraine's defense contact group, roughly 104 million to the Danish procurement model that allows foreign states to buy Ukrainian produced material for the Ukrainian military. About 43 million for the procurement to support the deployment of Ukraine's ground combat capabilities, etc., etc., and along with some stuff for the procurement of shells also for Ukraine. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, however you want to pronounce it, said on the 28th of May, following a meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky in Berlin, that Germany will finance a significant portion of Ukraine's Starlink satellite systems operations costs. Seems fairly small, but okay. There was an interesting bit to this also. It was another statement by some Ukrainian defense minister. I forgot what his position was, but he was saying that he wants to try to have the EU and a large amount of the coalition, the willing of European countries, to finance Ukrainian military. So I would say that would be an interesting adaptation to get around the lack of U.S. funding for their military operations and everything else like that. But it would be at the same time beneficial for both Europe and Ukraine because Ukraine needs immediate funds and means and training, all that stuff, right? That their needs are in the now. Uh, Europe needs time to rearm, and while some of that money might be diverted from their own procurement efforts and rebuilding the infrastructure for their bases and training up their militaries and stuff like that, that would buy them a much longer window to do that and much more comfortably politically speaking. I think both parties sorry, look to gain in that sort of arrangement if it is actuated, and I would hope that's what they step towards. But EU is going to EU. It routinely underperforms and is just under delivering what it should be doing. So I'm not expecting that to happen, but it would be great if it did. So last bit here from the rear area activity stuff here, guys. Kremlin is setting conditions to establish permanent control over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, suggesting that Russia plans to illegally occupy and annex additional territory in Ukraine. Greenpeace's Ukraine service reported on the 27th that satellite imagery from early February 2025 and May 2025 shows that Russia has laid 90 kilometers of power lines near the Sea of Azov in Donetsk Oblast and Zaporizhzhia Oblast. It was also reported that these new power lines are the first observed indications that Russia is acting upon its long-held plans to connect the ZNPP to the Russian power grid. Russian state nuclear energy operator Rosatom head Alexei Likhachev claimed on the 21st of May that Rosatom has developed a plan to bring the ZNPP to full capacity. What? I know, like you shut down the reactors for a goddamn reason. It's on the front line. Um, just because we're on Spotify now, many people might not know where the ZNPP is at. So let me find that really quick here, guys. I'll turn off the PowerPoint and I'll get back to the Ukraine map here. Let me just find it here again. Okay, actually, we're almost near where we left off there. Um, okay, so let me bring that over towards the presentation here. Okay, so the big square right here, this entire okay, let me bring up my cursor here. This whole thing is a nuclear power plant, right? So what you remember from the late 80s is the Chernobyl power plant, right? This one is bigger than that one. If I remember right, there were 4 or 6 reactors near Chernobyl. I'm not going to be counting smokestacks here, but obviously everyone's familiar with Chernobyl and Pripyat. This is part of the exclusion zone, obviously, out here. You can see not many people still there. Anyway, uh, how the Russians fucked up there. They want to take over what is the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. This power plant has six nuclear reactors. Um, so much to describe here. This river doesn't exist. Don't get me wrong, it does exist, but it's not this full. These are reservoirs that were backed up by the Novokakhovka Dam right here that was blown up by the Russians. We'll get all the caveats and little nuances I have to explain here. But they destroyed this entire reservoir system on the Dnieper River. The reason why this is all backed up is because the cooling pond right here is needed to supply the cooling infrastructure for the nuclear power plants. But by destroying this dam right here, the water levels decreased substantially, right? So the water levels here decreased and it revealed a huge wetland, basically. So interesting how nature adapts. So it's a lot of this is now just exposed wetlands. So interesting in a weird natural way. It kind of opened up more space for birds and fish and all the usual natural stuff to find new habitation. The unfortunate part of that, though, is that the water level for the cooling pond decreased to where they could not pull in water, if I remember right. So they put the reactors into cold status, to where basically they're not off, but they're cold off. That makes sense. There's a technical jargon, but they're not really producing so much power that it's really a threat anymore. So it's in a stable state right now, which is the responsible thing to do. But now we're hearing that they want to bring it to full capacity. How? Like, technically speaking, like you need cooling water to do that. They can't pull that up here unless they're going to build a ramp from the decreased water levels to the cooling pond to feed the power plant, right? So Russians lying in Russian fashion again. It's like the Ukrainians are right here, like not even like 12 kilometers. I bet. Let me just check here. So we'll just go from here to fuck 4 kilometers. I mean they could like see the sunrise right here with the cooling towers right from Nikopol in the safety of Ukrainian territory. And over in Herodar here also. Um, I don't know. It's a little nuts again, but I am continually surprised by the audacity is too generous a word, the chutzpah that the Russians continue to project in saying that they're going to bring what is effectively in operation in an operable nuclear power plant to full capacity when you can't even cool the damn thing. Whatever. But these fuckers make public statements they can't back up. But that's pretty much par for the course. But I'm still surprised that they do it because we try to be honest here on the show and in the West at large. But anyway, um, okay. So he also claimed in May 2024 to agree to the International Atomic Energy Agency or IAEA assessment that restarting the ZMPP was currently impossible, and the first condition for restarting the ZMP must be to ensure the security ensure its security either with security guarantee or after the front line had shifted away from the ZMPP, giving it back to Ukraine. This also leads to the next point. Donald Trump said in April 2025 in his 7-point peace plan that Ukraine would regain control of the ZMPP with U.S. involvement. But this is also part of the Ukraine-European peace plan. But now the Russians have said "fuck you" to Donald Trump essentially by saying, "No, we're going to bring this thing to full capacity under our control." So anyway, but Trump has not responded about this at all, of course. Um, much to our chagrin, we would hope that this would at least provoke Trump in some fashion. But him being the orange faggot that he is, or orange pidor, as they would say in Ukrainian, um, he hasn't responded to this at all. And the MAGA crowd doesn't even know where this power plant's at. So Putin shrugged off Trump's peace plan. Says we're going to turn on. They want to turn on the nuclear power plant, and Trump just looks like a fucking weak faggot again. So anyway, so that does it for the brief. There, proper guys. Let me bring it up on the articles here. Just trying to find it again. I got too many windows. Okay, here we go. And let me. Okay, that's the other window. Sorry, guys. One second. I had to play with things here, so now I have to switch it over. And that should be it. Okay, I don't know why it's not bringing that up. I'm sorry, guys. One second. Um, why is it not doing that? I'm sorry. Yeah, OBS is acting weird, guys. I apologize. I have to go through my windows here again. That should fix it. Okay, there we go. Anyway, free software. It's free for a reason. Okay, so we got about a dozen articles here. We'll just plow through. I did read some of the ones I wanted to read last week here for you guys. We'll go through those fairly quickly though, because I just want to touch the highlights here. Um, Russia's in the middle of its summer offensive again for what it's worth, but we haven't seen a whole. I don't know. Year on year, it seems that the gains that the Russians can make with these offensives, air quotes again, we're only in May, going into early June, but underwhelming to say the least. Really, there hasn't been a major restoration of the capacity to maneuver in the battle space at all, aside from that one successful bike assault that they had east of Mianrad in the Pokrov sector. Um, the rate of Russian advance began to accelerate over the autumn of 2024. This was after or that was 2023. I'm sorry. The years roll into each other after Avdiivka. But April, May 2025 saw a reduction of intensity of Russian operations, partly as a result of performative ceasefires around Eastern Victory Day and the redeployment of forces following the collapse of positions in Kursk, mainly due to U.S. intelligence sharing not happening because of Trump. Um, Having shuffled commanders and built up reserves of equipment, Russia is now set to increase the tempo and scale of attacks. They talk about the how the word offensive conjures up visions of rapid maneuver, but instead these will likely have a soft launch with a steady increase in the number and scale of assaults across a broadening sector and around the main axes, I would say, again, between Konstantinivka and Pokrovsk. And Russia has spent some time suggesting it might threaten Kharkiv and threaten Ukrainian defenses in Sumy and Zaporizhzhia. Again, this is just to spread out Ukrainian defenses. These attacks have either been intended to fix Ukrainian troops away from the Donbass or forestall further Ukrainian raids across the Russian border, which we actually saw happen last week with RDK and some other units, though. So Ukraine is back to raiding Russian positions now. Accompanying the intensifying attempts to take ground, Russia has also been innovating to work out how to degrade Ukraine's layered drone defenses. Ukraine has for some time been expanding its ability to knock out Russian and Ukrainian reconnaissance drones using its own drone interceptors, thereby blinding Russian units that would otherwise direct glide bombs and ballistic missiles against targets in the Ukrainian rear. Ukrainian interceptors, however, are guided by a small radar, and Russia is now systematically working to locate and target those radar stations. Another important line of effort for the Russians in attacking Ukraine's UAV pilots. Here, the methodology is using the direction finding, signals intelligence, and recon to pinpoint the location of pilots. Pilots is a generous word, but that's what they're calling them. And then target them with wire-guided drones and glide bombs. This has become more effective as Russia has increased the speed at which it can pass information between units. Separate from Russian attacks on the front will be the continuation of high-tempo, deep strikes against Ukrainian cities and civilians. Another point of leverage for Russia they will endeavor to exploit is the tensions between U.S. and NATO. Um, yeah, I don't have to go over that anymore. We talked about the social differences, and this show obviously has issues with the EU and its austerity measures, its immigration policy, and a lot of other things that have fucked up the social fabric of European nations. Sorry, a little water there. NATO is the problem. It's Brussels and DC by large part with their social policies. And for people on Spotify, again, I had to explain a lot of these baseline things. A lot of people on Odyssey already know, but on Spotify they might not know. Um, this particular show and our co-hosts and a lot of our audience don't have an issue with NATO, obviously, because it's a defensive security pact, defending a lot of the white Western world. But at the same time, we have major issues, socially speaking, in the politics of the heads of these respective states. Um, the caveat to that, though, is that many so-called nationalist, I'm air quoting again, candidates, Romania, I love using Romania because I know it pretty well, and in Poland also, but how to put it, because we talked about it on the show, with Romania in particular, um, there was George Simeon, who was the nationalist candidate, and then Nicolas Sardan, um, who won. He's more of a center right candidate. The nationalists in, I'm trying to think here, Poland, AFD in Germany, the Auer in Romania. I think they backtracked that a little bit in Romania. But most right-wing candidates, along with left-wing candidates, claim to be anti-war and want to decrease the defense spending in their in their respective countries in the middle of this war. Um, as a nationalist, in principle, your first principle is to defend and secure your people. If you're trying to take away money in the context of present circumstances, um, you're not that. Like you're violating one of the core principles of being a nationalist. And if you are not able to defend your own people and the space they live in, um, don't use that title. Like you're just lying. So at that point, we have to question their motives and where their motivations come from. And AFD has well documented connections to Russian intelligence, along with Die Linke, which is the left in German. Both, of the spectrum of mainstream politics in Germany, far left, far right, um, they both have connections to Russian intelligence. So we also have an article kind of connecting a party in Norway, actually, it just came out of the blue. They're a far left communist party in Norway, and they're labeling themselves as anti war. So when we talk about the division between Trump and NATO, that is partially of the effect of Russian psychological operations and political operations to divide Europe because it's easier for Russia to attack pieces of Europe if all of the Western world's not united against it. So that's the effect of politics, which affects the strategic operations for military operations for the Russian military. So that's how that all goes together. Anyway, just wanted to explain that a little bit more. Uh, anyway, let me just get to the conclusion here. Russia's economic outlook also darkens as we approach 2026. The collapse of oil price following Trump's tariff policy will severely limit Russian revenue. While its reserves are becoming depleted, more aggressive enforcement against Russia's shadow fleet and the continuation of Russia's deep strike campaign could reduce the liquid capital has so far allowed Russia to steadily increase defense production and offer massive bonuses for volunteers joining the military. If Ukraine can deny Russia from reaching the borders of Donetsk between now and Christmas, and Kyiv's international partners are diligent in degrading Russia's economy, Moscow will face hard choices about the cost of it is prepared to incur for continuing the war. Under such conditions, Russia may move from Potemkin negotiations to actually negotiating. There is a darker possible future in which the summer offensives overpower Ukraine defenses to take key towns in Donbass, after which Russia pivots to attacking Kharkiv in the autumn, while once again switching its deep strike campaign to degrade Ukraine power generation and distribution ahead of winter. Under some circumstances, the Russians hope to steadily convince Europe to pressure Ukraine to sue for peace, even on unacceptable terms. It is the belief that this trajectory is possible. It is the belief that this trajectory is possible that is keeping the Kremlin prepared to plow on, and despite the chronic underperformance of its arms, Ukraine and its partners must strip Kremlin of its illusions. So that's from Rusi. Okay, so this is a long one. I think I'll save this one for later because this was published a few days ago. But it's a great article. This is from Military Yarny, which is a Ukrainian military news outlet. It's published in English. There was a report that came out from what was the report? I'm trying to remember the name of it. Anyway, there was a published report coming out from the United States Defense Department, Department of Defense, and trying to phrase it right. It prioritizes the administration's foreign policy and defense goals in order of priority. So the first one was obviously the southern border because that's Trump's like bread and butter. But then he had China number two and then Russia number three. And this document explains, in summary, without having to get into all the kerfuffle about that PDF, what China would do in its overall military strategy, its geopolitical outlook, and stuff like that, though. I'll give you a case in point here. So, down near the bottom here, this would be their counter intervention strategy. So, they would look at the conflict zone as being most of the Pacific from west to east Pacific. And their strategy, this is all in Cyrillic, so I can't translate it all, but I did read it, and it would be that they would try to degrade the, lack of a better term, the ground lines of communication for the fleet to move from Hawaii to Guam and then to get to the battle space around Okinawa and Taiwan. They would use missiles, submarines, and stuff like that to degrade, confuse, and delay the American fleet from sailing from Hawaii or the West Coast over to the West Pacific. So that would be the way they would do that. They would strike carriers, command ships, AWACS, and stuff like that. In the meantime, so that would be their deterrence force. They would use their bigger blue water fleet to isolate and invade Taiwan. Um, so they would use shock and awe missiles, target saturation, and using their new barges and stuff, they would probably move from the Kinmen Islands to the outer islands around Taiwan and then to assault Taiwan itself eventually. So that's the summary of that a little bit. I'll save that for next week actually. So let's just press on through another reference here. This was from Front Intelligence, which is Operator Starsky's Substack. He does some interesting stuff. He tries to look more into the economic war production side of things for Russia, and he came up with this small report. We'll just get down to the bottom here. He went through a few of Rostech's holding companies, some of their like Krasnogorsky Zavod, And another one called I'm not going to try to enunciate that. It's an optical glass factory, and another joint stock company like Polyus Research Institute, and some others. So like the Schwabe one is another technological lab. He a little bit went into a little bit more about. Um, Talked about the unsatisfactory quality of some of their sensor systems and stuff like that. And that's an old Terminator, BMPT, yeah, Terminator for the Russians there. We'll get down to the conclusion here because he did say that the Russians are expanding their production capability, but still has some major issues as far as quality control goes. Sorry. Overall, given that okay, let me just leave the bottom here. It is clear that while Russia continues to grapple with production delays, quality control issues, and the challenges of sourcing components under sanctions, it is also making tangible progress in both manufacturing and the deployment of new technologies. Perhaps the most significant shift since the pre-war period is Russia's effort to integrate battlefield experiences not just into limited showcase upgrades like they have typically done, but into broader mass production, leveraging machinery and components sourced from both Western and Chinese suppliers. Barring a severe economic collapse or a major military defeat, if Russia would be able to spend several years building up and stockpiling equipment, our team believes that any future war involving Russia is likely to feature significantly more modern and technologically integrated military than the force launched a full-scale operation in 2022. That's their idea. Like we showed in the brief there earlier, the Russian forces only have 20% modern equipment or new equipment in their armed forces, though. Um, to take a few years to do that and to continue along with a war economy at this point, where the bank can't even give out new loans below 20%, it's feasible if the price of gas goes up. But again, like it's depending on market forces in the economy. That's why gas has to get below $40, which would be great for us Americans. But if that happens, then we would have to see Russia having to untangle their economy from a war footing, which would, I don't know, cause a collapse, but it would certainly fuck up the feasibility of continuing to fund the defense industrial base without putting stuff back into, more productive things like the infrastructure or the civilian economy. Anyway, um, that's what they said here. So what's behind the strength of the ruble, which is interesting because it floats between 100 to 80 rubles on the dollar. Anyway, so what's behind it? How is the Trump factor helping? Let me just double check the yeah. Okay. Since the beginning of the year, the ruble has gained nearly 40% against the U.S. dollar in terms of returns. Russia's currency has become more valuable than gold. While the ruble appreciated 38% against the dollar in off-market trading, gold rose by only 23% over the same period. The surge in the ruble's value has come despite 20% increase in government spending, which you would think would increase inflation. The ruble's 80 to dollar level is a result of several factors, but none of them is a truly fundamental driver. First, there's Donald Trump. The escalation of his trade wars has weakened the U.S. dollar. So you're not just comparing the ruble, you're also comparing the dollar to the ruble too. So Trump has fucked that up also. And even the mere fact that negotiations are underway between Washington and Moscow is fueling foreign investor interest in Russia's high yield assets, mainly gas. Second, within Russia, high interest rates dampen domestic demand for imports. Sorry, let me get some water here. Well, foreign sanctions restrict capital outflows. So all that's being stuck in the country, but it's not outflowing, and they're not having to buy imports. So they're keeping all that within their own ecosystem. The government is also prepared to prop up the ruble by selling foreign currency from its sovereign reserves, as it did in April, in response to the 65 billion ruble budget shortfall from expected oil and gas revenues. Okay, going down a little bit more. When will the ruble weaken? How does the current exchange rate affect prices? All other things being equal, the ruble is expected to weaken by 10 to 15% before the end of the year, to around 88 to 92 rubles per dollar, because the full impact of falling oil prices hasn't yet been factored into the exchange rate, a Russian think tank economist told Medusa. This is from Medusa. According to the senior official cited by Reuters, Russia's government would be comfortable with a rate of 100 rubles to the dollar, as it would help offset lost budget revenue from strong currency sanctions and falling global oil prices, which have eroded export earnings from commodity sales. Investment bank Goldman Sachs is forecasting a 100 ruble exchange rate as early as this summer. Analysts surveyed in April by Russia's central bank predicted an average dollar exchange of 95.2 rubles in 2025 to $1. Anyway, so it is expected to go back to about 100 rubles to the dollar, but this might sound like it's inflationary, but at the same time, it also makes Russian exports cheaper. So there's always a caveat to anything that happens, though. It's like, well, the ruble's okay because the dollar devalued because of Trump, but the price of gas sales going down for Russia um, also means that their oil is going to be cheaper. It's again, this is the complexity of macroeconomics, though. It's rather fascinating. Um, Let me go down here. Yeah, and the new sanctions that um, the EU tried to put on Russia ended up being toothless. The 17th round, because Hungary again um, defanged it. They weren't able to target specific parts of Russia, and at this point, another round of sanctions against Russia itself is not going to do much. So they need to start targeting secondary sanctions on anyone that deals with China. Like the Shadow Fleet, which is why that thing in Estonia was so important 2 weeks ago. Sorry. Um, we saw the Estonian Navy trying to, what's the right term? Search and seize uh, that oil ship, but the Russian military was doing flyovers, trying to deter the Estonian Navy. Now there's new reports coming out that the Russian Navy is escorting the Shadow Fleet vessels. So that's a major deterrence against any smaller nation to try to search and seize these ships if possible. So they have to get them out in the open ocean if possible, or no, I'm sorry, they have to be in their own territorial waters. So anyway, that's and it's just how these things work. Like the economy and the war go hand in hand. Quick note on last week's 1,000 for 1,000 prisoner exchange. There was a lot of anger from the right wing in Ukraine about not many Azovstal, or sorry, any Azovstal members being released in this exchange. Um, this article, again from Medusa, is talking about who was handed over. Of the 120 civilians handed over by Ukraine, 70 were Ukrainians convicted of crimes against national security, and who was not handed over to Ukraine. Military personnel among soldiers were freed in exchange. 311 were held in prison since 2022, and more since 2023 and 2024. According to the Coordination Headquarters for the Treatment of Prisoners of War, the agency also noted the exchange brought home troops from 46 Ukrainian armed forces units, which Russia had previously returned no one. However, none of them were released from the Azov Brigade. Prokopenko was rightfully pissed off that Ukraine did not back up the brigade in sending any of their guys home, who had defended Mariupol in 2022. Quote, "This feels like mockery, a cruel joke at the expense of those who had been held in Russian captivity for more than 3 years under the harshest conditions and inhumane pressure, a jeer at their families, loved ones, and brothers in arms, a show of derision towards those who were given guarantees, those who have absolute I'm sorry, those who have an absolute right to be prioritized for exchange, because they went to captivity not at their own will, but by the order of the High Command," said Denis Prokopenko, commander of the Azov National Brigade. Anyway, so their excuse is that they didn't have enough time to coordinate with Russia to get these guys back out because they're anyway part of Russia's game again is to denazify Ukraine, but the priority is to keep Azov prisoners there because they're considered Nazis by Russia. And Ukraine is saying, well, it takes more time for us to do this though, because the last negotiation in Istanbul, not the one yesterday, but a couple weeks before, was just really off the cuff, and they had just these lists that they had to bring in immediately to get these guys out. So that's the reason it's being given. But also now a lot more civilians are being exchanged between Russia and Ukraine, because there are civilians from Sudza that Ukraine had to extract out of a war zone because Russia was artillerying their own fucking village, to save the civilians. So now they're being exchanged for Ukrainian civilians that want to return back home. So that's also part of the exchanges now. It's not just prisoners of war. It's also civilians that want to return to one country or the other. So, okay, speaking of political parties that are aligned with Russia. Norway. Sorry, I got two things in my head. Norway has a new political party. On 17th of May, Norway's Constitution Day, anti-Ukrainian political ads flooded Oslo. The campaign coincided with the Norwegian government's decision to nearly triple its aid to Ukraine to approximately $7.8 billion, which is pretty good for a small country like Norway. Um, the campaign was driven by a little-known political party for peace and justice, founded only in January this year in 2025. Uh, FORs, which is the short acronym for it, controversial ad campaign quickly stirred backlash in Norway with the party accused of spreading Kremlin propaganda. Prime Minister Johannes Gahr Store felt compelled to respond, saying that he, quote, fundamentally disagreed with FOR's stance. The Norwegian Parliament stands united in support for Ukraine. Their fight is also about our values and has direct consequences for our security policy, he emphasized. Public reaction was even stronger. Although the anti-Ukraine ads were seen to run until 25 May, ordinary Norwegians began tearing down the ads, prompting FOR leader Marielle Lerand to decry the vandalism and announce an early end to the campaign. She says they had a successful campaign to promote peace and prosperity, blah, 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 saying that the money should be reinvested back into Norway, etc., etc. So it's kind of the same thing we hear from the MAGA people. It's like, well, why don't we get that money? It's like at the same time they want less government spending, but they want the money spent here. It's like, well, which is it, dude? Like, do you just want anyway? You get the hypocrisy there. Um, but so anyway, that's just what's also on the horizon in Norway. Many of FOR's members previously belonged to the far left Red Party, founded in part by Norway's Communist Party. So this is a rebranded version of Norway's communists, which is kind of an odd thing, you know. But anyway, uh, let's see here. So yeah, there is some new numbers about Russian recruitment rates. It was starting to dip down in 2024. We'll get down to the bottom here, guys, just to give you the raw numbers. It was noted that recruitment rates have slowed down compared to the previous year. In particular, an average of 1,700 people signed contracts per day in the fourth quarter of 2024 in Russia, which is 1.3 times less than the same period in 2023. Also, data suggests that Russian regions show that the rate of contract recruitment continued to decline in spring 2025. However, Putin announced a twofold increase to 1,800 recruits a day. I don't know if that's true or not. But meanwhile, German researchers said that contracts with the Russian armed forces are now being signed at an average of 1,000 a day. So that's pretty important. Let me just see if they're showing it here. So we're looking at 1,000 a day. Russia is back over the 1,000 death or casualty mark a day now. So that's pretty significant. If Russia is losing more than they're getting in flow from the contracts signing, that means that their force will be dwindling, or at least atrophying so bad that they can't build up reserves. So that is interesting. Um, a handful of things left. God, they keep showing these ass ads here. Jesus Christ. Um, Kiev Mayor Vitaly Klitschko, sorry, accuses Zelensky of authoritarianism amid corruption scandal. We don't have any. We don't hide the state of Ukraine political affairs. It's always had a problem of corruption and sleight of hand and stuff like that. It's been overreported, however, I will say, but no, Zelensky has done some questionable things, and there's been some very interesting stories earlier in 2023 related to the mystery of the interior and stuff like that. But we'll leave that beside the point. But Klitschko has accused Zelensky of power centralization, claiming Ukraine now stinks of authoritarianism. The Times posted a comprehensive article about, quote, the most famous Ukrainian politicians in the national arena, unquote, noting that the outset of the war, Zelensky leveraging martial law appointed military administration in Kyiv, which overlaps with the mayor's authority. Meanwhile, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, or NABU, through its Clean City operation, uncovered widespread corruption within Klitschko's circle, leading to the arrest of 7 of his subordinates. So now he's accusing Zelensky of corruption despite his obvious dealings. Klitschko stated that the Kyiv City Council's operations have been disrupted by, quote, raids, interrogations, and threats of fabricated criminal cases, preventing councilors from achieving a quorum for decision making. Quote, this purge of democratic principles and institutions under the guise of war. Or this is a purge, sorry. I said that it's, sorry, this is still from him. I said once that it smells of authoritarianism in our country. Now it stinks. Klitschko portrays the situation as an attempt by the president to centralize power, reflecting growing concerns that Zelensky's consolidation of authority during the war is undermining democracy. He accused the president of using military administrations to strip powers from democratically elected mayors. So, probably just normal Eastern European politics. One gets accused of something, and the other accuses the other of the same thing. So, anyway. But we'll move on here. Just a quick little headliner here. Russia has killed 58 emergency workers since the start of the war. Um, we've talked about how missile strikes often double tap. Um, how to put it? Missile strikes and the locations where they first hit, and there'll be a follow-up strike where they again try to kill emergency workers. I thought the figure would be higher, but according to the source, it's less than 60. So that means they have good practices to keep their emergency aid workers safe and alive and on the job. But again, things will happen because Russia's launching 100 drones a fucking day sometimes. So, but it's good to see that most or a lot of their aid workers aren't getting killed, at least. Probably injured at the same time. But anyway, since the beginning of 2022, emergency medical workers in Ukraine have responded to nearly 20 million calls, an average of 16,000 per day. Um, Sorry. On occasion, the emergency medical workers. Okay, I'm not going to read that part. Ministry reported that Russia has killed 58 emergency medical personnel and injured another 122 since the full-scale invasion. So pretty low numbers considering it's a full-scale war. In addition, Russia has destroyed or damaged over 600 ambulances. Quote, the enemy constantly targets vehicles and crews responding to calls in the frontline oblasts. Despite the war, emergency care continues to be provided. There are more than 2,300 emergency medical teams operating in Ukraine, employing nearly 33,000 medical workers. So, pretty good. I'm glad to see that we're not seeing so many being injured or killed. So, after what 33,000 said, yeah, only less than 60 have perished. So, every loss of life is important, but again, we're looking at long term. That's pretty good. This was a meme vehicle I mentioned earlier on the combat footage show. The Russians want to, I don't know how to put it, put propellers on their vans to use as drone defense. Yeah, I yeah. Russia patents new anti-drone device. So Russia's patented a new anti-drone device for the UAZ-452 Bukhana vehicles. Armored vehicle analyst Andrei BT reported that the system consists of special sets of propellers with electric motors, sorry. Designed as a frame that can be mounted on the body of the vehicle. At least one electric motor with blades on the shaft is mounted on this frame, and the motors can be connected to the vehicle's power supply. Mechanical impact of FPV drones is achieved by rotating the blades. Um, Due to poor communication, it's difficult for UAV operators to identify the rotation of the blades and their limits of the monitor. According to the design, when attempting to attack a protected vehicle, the drone is likely to enter the rotation zone of one of the blades. Um, anyway, that's what they're trying to install on these vehicles. We'll see how effective it is, but I doubt it, though. And this is obviously the frame here. So it's about 6 blades, 7 altogether if you put it on the top there, too. So that's a bit of a Jetson van there. I just thought that was funny. Um, yeah, I thought this was another fun. We're kind of ending on the show here on a lighter note. Um, Uzbekistan came out with their new modernized T-64 tank. It is a absolute knockoff of the KH-51 Panzer or Panther tank that Rheinmetall has put out earlier. They're trying to shroud their barrel in this futuristic-looking European cannon shroud here also. But this is the this is the tank here. Let me just. Anyway, so that's supposed to be the new Uzbek T-64 tank. The Uzbek defense industry has presented a modernized version of the T-64 Bravo main battle tank, which has not been seen publicly before. It is reported that the official presentation of the new model will take place in an exhibit at the capital's Victory Park, which will run from May 29th to June 1st. We'll see if there's any follow-up to that later. The futuristic design of the combat vehicle is particularly striking. The entire tank hull is concealed under a protective cover, which is likely made of armored elements or armor elements. This could increase the survivability of the tank vehicle in modern combat, where drones are the primary engagement system. On the sides, you can see a long continuous panel with diagonal rectangles and honeycombs on the surface, which are not protective but rather decorative elements. Again, aesthetics. The engine and transmission compartment are also changed. The exhaust system has two pipes instead of a single flat one, and the radiator grills are wavy in shape. They're talking about these bits right here. The tank turret is completely hidden under the armor. The rear part has an extension, presumably a niche compartment for storing equipment, installing air conditioning systems, or additional electronics. So, anyway, it's just kind of a funny looking thing. I don't know how real practical it is. And then that's your exhaust, is the two pipes coming out the back there. So, just kind of funny. Anyway, let me end up here on a couple more notes here, guys. This was an interview looking at how the new center-right government or central government in Romania is going to interface with Ukraine. Same stuff as usual. Ukraine's a shield for Romania, support their democratic values, stuff like that, though. So it's kind of basic bitch stuff coming from the new Romanian government and the coalition that's coming out of it too. So a lot of stability. Things are going to be fine for the most part for the immediate future concerning that part of Ukraine's frontier with Europe, um, which is good because it's needed right now. But you have Diana, so I can never say that correctly in Romanian. Soasashka. Anyway, this is Greater Romania. A lot of right-wing Romanians want a lot of this whole territory back. The part that Ukraine took is Bukovina, which is this yellow part right here. A lot of Carpathian Mountains there, so it's a fairly small segment of Russia, of Ukraine that was detached from Romania, but also a lot of Bessarabia here too. Obviously, a lot of, I think even most international people say that a lot of this could be returned to Romania because it's inhabited by Romanians. Um, but then the southern part here, this little tip right here at the bottom, was taken by Bulgaria. It's a very multi-ethnic area too, so it's not really wholly settled by Romanians. A lot of Turks, Russians, Bulgars, and Romanians all live together side by side down there. But that's what Bulgaria took back after 1944, if I remember right. Anyway, um, it's interesting how a lot of this history is wrapped up in modern politics. But anyway, we'll save that for another time. To talk more in depth later. But yeah, the last article here, guys. This is just interesting from a domestic point of view. I wanted to share with you guys what Trump has done to the federal government in, how to put it, the federal effort to curtail far left and far right stuff going on there. It's been basically delegated to the states now. So now the typical people from ProPublica. Um, won't get into all the politics, but needless to say, ProPublica has been a very biased source for nonprofit organizations, and they're trying to create this national network through the civil society, so to speak, and prosecuting it down at the state level now. Anyway, there was this big conference they had in Detroit, talking about how things are getting a little more risky for the political class in America, basically. They were talking about the kidnapping plot against the Michigan governor, um, and how worried they are about that, and how it's possible that Trump is going to just really sit back a lot of these efforts back decades, really, because he's cutting funding to a lot of these programs. Um, Anyways, again, talking about budget cuts and stuff like that, though. But this is just interesting how it goes into detail about a lot of the Justice Department is also going downhill, according to their views of how Trump's trying to weaponize it against them and all this stuff, though. But I'll give you a little point here. Michigan, long hotbed of anti-government government militia activity, was an early adopter of strategies to fight domestic terrorism, extremism, sorry, making it a target of conservative pundits who accuse the state of criminalizing right-wing organizing. An anti-Muslim group is challenging the constitutionality of Nestle's hate crimes unit in a federal suit that has dragged on for years. In December, after a protracted political battle, Michigan adopted a new hate crime statute that expands an old law with additions such as protections for the LGBTQ plus communities and people with disabilities. Right-wing figures lobbied, threatening slurs at the author, State Representative Noah Arbit, a gay Jewish Democrat, of course, who spoke alongside Nestle at Temple Israel, which is in his district and where he celebrated his bar mitzvah. Anyway, um, yeah, depending on your politics, this is either good or bad. Again, I know our typical audience is right wing, but we're also talking to your people sometimes on Spotify. Um, it's interesting because this is a power struggle. Um, again, they're talking a lot more about Michigan and how local organizers in Michigan itself are trying to uh, move into a space now left vacated by the federal government. And by doing this through civic um, society, again air quotes there, they're trying to institute new hate crime laws at a state level and have state apparatuses uh, buffed up to take over what the federal government is not doing anymore. I have a lot of issues with that because, how to put it, like this is an attack on freedoms when they're trying to create more laws on speech, political activism, and political anything really. It's just a class of people trying to protect their power, whatever that might be. I'll leave it up for the viewer or listener to decide what that is. Um, and it kind of shows the instability in the American domestic political scene still. We live in a very polarized country, but at the same time, when Trump has taken money out of these domestic security apparatuses of his own base, at the same time, you're going to have an overreaction, it feels like, from the left, trying to counter these things and trying to shore up their defenses in blue states. Michigan kind of being a coin flip now at this point. So I would imagine a lot more out of like Chicago and Colorado, New York, California, typical blue states, maybe even Hawaii, to start shoring up their legislation as far as hate crimes go, gun laws, internet laws, political assembly laws, stuff like that. So um, things are moving in interesting direction domestically also. Okay. That does it for the show, guys. We ran over 2 hours, but that's fine. For anyone listening over on Spotify, please join the channel over at t.me/the Warcast. And please donate over at buymeacoffee/WCast. And we'll leave it at that. Anyone listening in Ukraine, Godspeed and good hunting. I hope your victory comes soon. And anyone else in the wider Western world, please do something good this week, all right? There's a lot of shit going on that needs to be fixed, and it's up to us to make the world better, all right? God bless and Godspeed, guys.